Mom is in the emergency room and the hospital needs a $300,000 deposit before they can operate. My son cried over the phone. I dropped everything and rushed there. But the moment I stepped toward my wife's room, a nurse grabbed my arm and pulled me into a supply closet. "Stay quiet and don't sign anything," she whispered. "Your wife isn't in the condition they told you. Hide here for a few minutes and you'll understand." Then I heard a familiar voice behind the door say something that made my blood run cold. "You're watching Revenge, Dad, and I'm grateful you stayed. Before we go deeper, drop your city or country below. Let's see who's here tonight from around the world." Note: this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental, but what this story teaches you is something worth holding on to. The blueprints were perfect. Richard Hayes leaned back in his chair and held the design sheet up toward the ceiling light, tilting it slightly so the overhead fluorescence caught every precise line. 22 years of refinements, dozens of prototypes, and now, finally, the X7 product line was ready. He set the paper down on the mahogany desk and pressed both palms flat against it, steadying himself the way he always did when something felt right. The office on the 28th floor of One Bunker Hill was his favorite place in the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced west, and on clear evenings like this one, the Los Angeles skyline burned gold and amber as the sun dropped behind the Santa Monica Mountains. Richard had built this view. Not just the office, not just the building lease, but the right to stand here and look out at this city and know that something he had created with his own two hands was woven into the fabric of it. 35 years ago, he had been a 27-year-old with a drafting table, a used computer, and a two-car garage in Pasadena that smelled like motor oil and sawdust. Hayes' Innovation Studio had begun as a single folding table pushed against a cinder-block wall. Now, it occupied 4 floors of premium downtown real estate and employed 312 people. He glanced at the framed photograph on the corner of his desk. The 3 of them, Richard, Linda, and a gap-toothed 8-year-old Ethan, standing in front of that same Pasadena garage on the day they had officially moved operations into a proper office space. Linda was laughing at something off camera, her head thrown back, her dark hair catching the afternoon sun. Ethan had both arms wrapped around Richard's leg, grinning so wide his eyes had nearly disappeared. Richard touched the edge of the frame with one finger. A soft knock pulled him back. "Still at it." Carol Simmons leaned through the doorway, her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Carol had been his CFO for 15 years, sharp, precise, and constitutionally incapable of leaving a financial discrepancy unaddressed. She was also, Richard had long believed, the single most competent person in the building. "Just reviewing the X7 layouts one more time," he said. Carol raised an eyebrow. "You've reviewed them 14 times this week." 15 now, he smiled. "Go home, Carol." She pointed at him with her portfolio. "You should take your own advice." She pulled the door halfway closed, then stopped. "The Q3 numbers look strong, by the way. I'll have the full report on your desk by Thursday morning." "Thank you," he said. "Good night." The door clicked shut. Richard turned back to the window. The city pulsed below him, indifferent and luminous. He was thinking about the product launch timeline, running the rollout sequence in his head for the 100th time when his phone buzzed against the desk. The screen read, "Ethan." He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, son, I was just about to—" "Dad." Ethan's voice cracked down the middle of that single syllable. Richard's hand tightened around the phone. He had not heard that sound, that particular fracture in his son's voice, since Ethan was 19 years old and had called from a college party that had gone badly wrong. "Ethan, what happened?" "It's Mom." A ragged breath. "Dad, she collapsed at the office. They brought her to Cedars-Sinai by ambulance. The doctors are saying it's her heart and it's bad, and they need—" His voice broke entirely. "They need $300,000 as a deposit before they can prep the operating room. Dad, they won't touch her without it. They said if we don't get it to them in the next few hours—" Richard was already on his feet. The blueprint fell off the desk. He did not look down at it. "I'm coming," he said, his voice dropping into the flat-controlled register he used when panic was not an option. "I'm leaving right now. You stay with her. Do you hear me? You stay in that building. Please hurry." Ethan's voice disintegrated into something that sounded like a sob. "Please, Dad." Richard grabbed his car keys from the desk drawer, shrugged his jacket on without buttoning it, and walked out of his office without turning off the lights. The elevator ride down to the parking structure felt like it lasted 40 minutes. His chest was so tight, he pressed one fist against his sternum as the floor numbers dropped, trying to push the feeling back down. Linda, 35 years, the woman who had believed in him when the garage had been their only asset. The woman who had worked double shifts at a downtown architecture firm to keep them afloat while he poured every dollar they had into a company that had not yet turned a single profit. The woman in the photograph. He got the Volvo out of the structure and merged onto the I-10 west, pushing the speed as much as he dared. The freeway was still thick with evening traffic, and every red brake light ahead of him felt like a physical obstruction pressing against his ribs. His phone rang through the car speakers. Ethan again. "Dad, where are you?" I-10 westbound, 15 minutes out, maybe less. They're asking about the deposit again. The woman at the billing desk keeps coming out to the waiting room and asking if someone is coming to handle the paperwork. Ethan's breathing was fast and shallow. "I don't have that kind of money liquid right now, Dad. I've been trying to explain that to them, but they keep saying hospital policy is hospital policy, and Mom is just, she's in there, and I can't even go in because they're running tests and—" "Ethan!" Richard cut through it. "I will handle the money. You focus on being there when she wakes up. That is your only job right now." A beat of silence on the line, and then, "Okay, yes, sir." Richard pressed the accelerator. The Cedars-Sinai Medical Center campus rose on his left as he turned off San Vicente Boulevard, the complex lit up white and institutional against the darkening Beverly Hills sky. He pulled into the emergency parking structure, took a ticket from the automated gate, and drove 2 levels down before finding a space. He was out of the car before the engine had fully stopped moving through the concrete structure toward the elevator at a pace just short of a run. His phone buzzed one more time. "Ethan. Dad, they're saying they need the paperwork signed before they can even finalize the surgical team. Please tell me you're close." "I'm walking in right now," Richard said. He pushed through the heavy glass doors of the emergency entrance. The smell hit him immediately, antiseptic and recycled air, and something beneath it that every hospital in the world seemed to share, something sterile and urgent and faintly frightening. The waiting area was bright and crowded rows of plastic chairs filled with people clutching insurance cards and looking at their phones. Richard scanned the corridor ahead, looking for Ethan, looking for a nurse, looking for someone who could point him toward Linda. He had taken 3 steps into the building when a hand closed firmly around his wrist from the right side. He spun. A woman in navy blue scrubs was gripping his arm, her dark eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that stopped him cold. She looked to be in her mid-30s with the alert, watchful expression of someone who had learned to assess situations in seconds. Her badge read, "Rebecca Nolan, RN." "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice dropping so low he had to lean in to hear it over the ambient noise of the waiting room. "Please, don't make a sound, and come with me right now." Richard's first instinct was to pull away. He outweighed Rebecca Nolan by at least 60 pounds, and the grip she had on his wrist firm, urgent angled slightly upward, was the grip of someone who had physically redirected uncooperative patients before. He could have broken it easily. Instead, something in the controlled urgency of her eyes made him hesitate for exactly 1 second. That second was enough. She moved fast, steering him sideways through the waiting room, with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew every inch of this corridor, every camera angle, every blind spot. They passed the main nursing station, turned left, past a supply cart stacked with folded blue gowns, and then Rebecca pushed open an unmarked door at the end of a short hallway and pulled him through it. The room was small and dark, a medical supply closet shelves loaded with sealed packages of gauze ivory tubing and boxed syringes lining 3 walls from floor to ceiling. The only light came from a thin strip beneath the door they had just come through, casting a pale yellow line across the linoleum floor. Rebecca released his wrist and pressed her back against the shelving unit behind her. She was breathing carefully, not panicked, but deliberate, the way someone breathes when they are working very hard to stay in control. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" Richard's voice came out rougher than he intended, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his back teeth. "My wife is in here somewhere. She needs surgery. I don't have time for—" "Mr. Hayes." Rebecca cut him off, not unkindly, but with the absolute firmness of someone who needed him to stop talking immediately. "I know why you're here, and I know what they told you on the phone, but I need you to listen to me for 60 seconds before you take another step in this building, because what I'm about to tell you could save you from making a catastrophic mistake. Richard's jaw tightened. Every muscle in his body was coiled toward that door, toward Linda, toward whatever room she was in. But something in Rebecca's voice, the steadiness of it, the complete absence of performance, kept him where he was. "Talk," he said. Rebecca exhaled. "I'm the nurse who processed your wife's intake tonight. I was the first clinical staff member to review her vitals when she arrived." She paused, choosing her next words with visible care. "Mr. Hayes, your wife's numbers are normal. Her blood pressure is 118/76. Her oxygen saturation is 98%. Her EKG on intake showed no acute abnormalities whatsoever." The words landed in Richard's chest like stones dropped into still water. That can't be right," he said, his voice losing its edge and gaining something raw in its place. "Ethan said her heart—" "I know what your son said." Rebecca's eyes were steady on his. "I also know that when I flagged my concerns to Dr. Frost, the attending physician on duty tonight, he dismissed them without reviewing the intake chart himself. He told me I was overreacting and to focus on my other patients." Her jaw tightened briefly. "I have worked in this emergency department for 9 years, Mr. Hayes. I know what a cardiac emergency looks like, and I know what this looks like." Richard felt the first cold thread of something work its way up through his chest. Not grief, not panic, but something older and more dangerous, something that felt like the beginning of understanding. "What does this look like?" he asked, and his voice came out very quiet. Rebecca held his gaze. "I don't know the full picture. I want to be honest with you about that. But here is what I do know. From the moment your son arrived at this hospital, he has not asked a single medical question about your wife's condition. Not one. He has asked about financial authorization forms. He has asked about signature requirements. He has asked about the hospital's billing verification process." She leaned forward slightly. "A man whose mother is having emergency heart surgery does not spend his time asking about billing verification, Mr. Hayes." Richard's hand moved to the shelf beside him, without his permission, fingers closing around the metal edge. The cold of it grounded him. "You said you wanted me to see something," he said. "There's a room at the end of the east corridor." Rebecca reached past him and eased the supply closet door open by a fraction of an inch, just enough for a narrow wedge of hallway light to fall across the floor between them. "Room 114. Your wife is in there. I need you to look through the door before you go in. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, please do not go in yet. Please." The urgency in that last word, the way it cracked just slightly at the edges, was what moved him. Richard pressed himself to the door frame, put his eye to the gap, and looked. The room was well lit, the fluorescence bright and clinical. A standard hospital bed sat against the far wall, the kind with adjustable railings, and a thin mattress wrapped in crinkled white paper. Linda was sitting upright on it, not lying down, not connected to a cardiac monitor, not with an oxygen mask over her face, or an IV line in her arm, or any of the equipment that Richard had been bracing himself to see for the last 40 minutes of white-knuckle driving. She was sitting upright, her hospital gown arranged neatly. Her color absolutely normal, her posture the relaxed and unhurried posture of a woman who had been waiting comfortably for something she expected to arrive on schedule. Richard's throat closed. Ethan stood near the window on the left side of the room, his jacket off his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was not crying. He was not pacing. He was standing with his arms crossed and his weight shifted slightly back on one heel in the specific way he stood when he was feeling confident about something. And then Richard's eyes moved to the third person in the room. The man was in his early 50s, thick across the shoulders, with silver-streaked hair, cut close, and a dark suit that had not come off any rack. He was standing near the foot of the bed with his hands clasped in front of him, and his face wore the expression of a man who was exactly where he had planned to be. Richard knew that face. He knew it from 10 years of industry conferences, from competing bids on the same government contracts, from a profile piece in the Los Angeles Business Journal 18 months ago that had described the man as the most aggressive acquirer in California's industrial design sector. Victor Reynolds, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Design Group, the largest competitor Hayes Innovation Studio had ever faced, standing in the hospital room of Richard's wife. The cold thread in Richard's chest turned into a flood. His knees wanted to buckle. He locked them. His hand on the metal shelf tightened until the edge of it bit into his palm, and the small, sharp pain of it was the only thing that kept him from making a sound he could not take back. Behind him, Rebecca's voice came barely above a whisper. "Now you know why I stopped you." Richard did not move for a full 10 seconds. He stood with his eye pressed to the crack in the supply closet door. His hand locked around the metal shelf beside him, and he forced himself to breathe through his nose in slow measured counts, the way his doctor had taught him to manage his blood pressure during quarterly checkups. In through the nose, hold for 4, out through the mouth. It did not help. His heart was slamming against the inside of his chest like it was trying to get out. Behind him, Rebecca said nothing. She understood he realized that there was nothing useful she could say right now. Richard reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. His fingers found his phone. He pulled it out slowly, angled the screen away from the crack in the door so no light would escape outward, and pressed the side button to drop the brightness to absolute 0. The screen went dark. Working by touch and 35 years of muscle memory from signing contracts in dimly lit conference rooms, he navigated to the voice memo application and pressed record. The red timer began to count. He pressed the microphone end of the phone as close to the gap in the door as he could manage without touching the frame, and then he listened. Victor Reynolds was speaking. "I needed to be here in person tonight," Victor said. "The final transfer protocols require my direct sign-off before we proceed. This is not the kind of conversation I have over a phone line. The design files your team transferred over the past 3 months are more than sufficient." His voice carried the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once in his professional life been caught off guard. "Our engineering team has already begun reverse integration on the X7 schematics. We anticipate a market-ready prototype within 11 weeks. Hayes Innovation's own launch timeline puts them at 16 weeks minimum." He paused. "By the time Richard's product hits retail shelves, Apex will have been on the market for a full month. The narrative writes itself." Richard's stomach dropped so hard and so fast that he had to press his free hand flat against the wall to keep himself upright. The X7. The blueprints he had been holding in his hands less than 2 hours ago. The 22 years of refinements. Ethan had taken them. Ethan had transferred them deliberately, systematically over 3 months to the single company on Earth most positioned to destroy Hayes Innovation with them. He forced himself to keep breathing. In through the nose. Hold. Out. Ethan's voice came next, and hearing it sent a wave of nausea rolling through Richard's chest that he had to actively fight down. "The Long Beach situation is clean," Ethan said, and his tone was the tone of a man giving a project status update in a Monday morning meeting, brisk, factual, entirely without guilt. "The shipment came in under the Meridian Freight Manifest. 14 containers, all documented under Hayes Innovation's registered importer ID. The receiving logs, the customs declarations, the warehouse intake, forms every single document in the chain, lists Hayes Innovation Studio as the responsible party." He paused. "When the federal investigators pull the import records, they will find one name on every page." Victor said it first. "Richard Hayes." "Every violation," Ethan confirmed, "goes straight to him." Richard understood, with the terrible clarity of a man who had spent 35 years building contracts and reading liability clauses, exactly what he was hearing. Under 18 U.S.C., Section 5 of 45, the federal statute governing the smuggling of goods into the United States, the registered importer of record bore full criminal liability for any unlicensed or prohibited materials in a shipment. It did not matter who had physically arranged the shipment. It did not matter who had actually paid for it. What mattered was whose name was on the paperwork, and Ethan had made absolutely certain that name was his father's. The nausea rolled through him again, stronger this time. He swallowed it. Victor shifted the conversation with the smooth efficiency of someone running a board meeting. "The wire transfers are clean on our end. The intellectual property acquisition will be categorized as a licensing agreement in our internal records, which means that even if someone eventually connects the design files back to Hayes Innovation, Apex's exposure is limited to a civil dispute." He adjusted his posture, and Richard could hear the slight rustle of his jacket through the gap. "The criminal liability stays entirely on the Hayes Innovation side of the ledger." "Correct," Ethan said. "Once Dad is under federal investigation for the import violations, his ability to run the company becomes legally compromised. The board will have grounds to call for an emergency leadership review. I step in as interim CEO to—" He paused, and Richard could hear the smile in his voice. Could hear it the way you hear something that used to sound like pride and now sounds like something you cannot name, to stabilize the company during a difficult period. Richard checked the voice memo timer on his phone without taking his eye from the crack in the door. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He had captured the Long Beach smuggling scheme in precise detail. He had captured the intellectual property transfer. He had captured Victor Reynolds, confirming Apex's role in receiving stolen trade secrets in violation of the Defend Trade Secrets Act of 2016, a federal statute that carried criminal penalties of up to 10 years per count for knowing acquisition of misappropriated proprietary information. He had enough. He should stop now, pull back from the door, walk to the elevator, and start making phone calls. But then Linda spoke. She had been quiet through the entire exchange, sitting on the bed with the relaxed posture Richard had observed through the crack, letting the two men run through the operational details the way a project manager lets her team present their work before she delivers final notes. When she spoke, her voice was easy and unhurried and completely, utterly familiar. It was the voice she used when she was satisfied. "Ethan." The warmth in it hit Richard somewhere below the ribs. "You've done exactly what I told you to do from the very beginning, every step." A brief pause. "I'm proud of you." The words detonated in Richard's chest like something physical. Not because they were cruel, though they were, not because they confirmed everything Rebecca had been trying to tell him, though they did, but because he recognized that specific sentence, that cadence, that particular combination of approval and ownership from 35 years of marriage. Linda said those words when something had gone exactly according to her plan. He looked at Victor Reynolds through the crack in the door. Victor was not looking at Ethan. Victor was looking at Linda. Not the way a business partner looks at a co-conspirator, the way a contractor looks at the architect who designed the building he was hired to construct, with respect, with deference, with the clear and unmistakable acknowledgement of who had actually drawn the blueprints. Richard felt his legs go watery beneath him. He locked his knees. He pressed the phone harder against the door frame. His thumb hovered over the screen. He had 4 minutes and 17 seconds of audio evidence. He needed every word that came next. The red timer kept running. $348,000 in potential criminal liability. 10 years of prison exposure under the DTSA alone. His company, his name, his life's work. And his wife's voice, warm and proud and entirely, completely satisfied, still hanging in the recycled hospital air. Richard Hayes pressed his back teeth together so hard his jaw ached. And he kept recording. "Before I reveal the name of the person who planned every single piece of this betrayal, the one nobody saw coming, comment ready below. I want to know who's still here before I say what I'm about to say. Also, this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. If you'd prefer not to continue, this is a good place to stop." 6 minutes and 41 seconds. Richard checked the voice memo timer one final time, then saved the file and immediately uploaded it to his personal cloud server. The one backed up to 3 separate data centers in 2 different states. The one whose access credentials existed only in his memory and nowhere else on Earth. His fingers moved fast and sure across the screen, muscle memory carrying him through the steps, while the rest of his mind was doing something entirely different. It was doing the thing it had always done in 35 years of building a company from nothing. It was sorting. He sorted the facts the way he sorted structural problems in a new product design, by load-bearing weight, by failure point, by what would collapse first if left unaddressed. He did not allow himself to feel anything yet. Feeling was for later. Right now, there were only variables and what to do about them. Variable 1. Linda, the woman who had slept beside him for 35 years, who had held his hand in the Pasadena garage on the night they had almost lost everything to a vendor dispute in 1997, who had cried at Ethan's college graduation and gripped Richard's arm so hard she left marks had been running this operation for at minimum 2 years. The private consulting email Rebecca had flagged. The introductions to Victor that James Kowalski would later confirm. 2 years of sitting across from him at dinner, of asking about his day, of listening to him talk through the X7 development timeline with what he had believed was genuine interest. She had been taking notes. The realization did not arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived the way the worst things always arrived, quietly, completely, with the specific weight of something that had always been true and was only now becoming visible. Richard felt it move through him from his throat to his stomach, cold and thorough and absolute. He pressed his back teeth together until his jaw ached. He breathed. Variable 2. Ethan, his son, the gap-toothed 8-year-old in the photograph on his desk grown into a 34-year-old man who had just spent 3 months systematically transferring the intellectual property of a company his father had built from the ground up, transferring it piece by piece, file by file, to the competition with the careful patience of someone who had been told exactly how to do it and by whom. Richard's chest cracked open in a way that had nothing to do with his heart and everything to do with the 26 years between that photograph and this hallway. He gave himself 4 seconds to feel it, exactly 4 seconds. Then he locked it away. Variable 3, the trap that was waiting for him in that room. He understood it completely now. The financial liability form Dr. Frost was preparing, the one Ethan would shove into Richard's hands the moment he walked through that door, was designed to accomplish 2 things simultaneously. First, it would make Richard the legally designated guarantor for a fraudulent medical procedure, creating a paper trail of financial complicity. Second, and more critically, it would establish documented evidence that Richard had knowingly participated in a hospital transaction linked to the same billing records that would later be cross-referenced against the Long Beach import violation paperwork. A signed financial liability form in the hands of a prosecutor looking to establish a pattern of fraudulent conduct was not just a piece of paper. It was a brick in a wall they were building around him. He was not going to sign it, except that he was. Because under California Civil Code Section 1689, any contract, including a hospital financial liability agreement that was induced by fraud, was void from its inception. Not voidable. Void. A fraudulent instrument had no legal force regardless of who signed it or how many times. The moment Dr. Frost had fabricated a cardiac diagnosis to induce Richard's signature, the document ceased to exist as an enforceable legal obligation. It was paper. It was ink. It was nothing. 35 years of signing contracts had taught Richard Hayes exactly one thing above all others: the most dangerous signature is the one the other party believes they understand. He straightened up from the door frame. He rolled his neck once heard it crack. He tucked his phone into his inside breast pocket screen. Down recording, stopped and saved. Then he did something that took more concentrated effort than anything else he had done in the past 40 minutes. He let his hands start shaking. It was not difficult. The raw material was already there, the adrenaline, the grief, the fury that he had spent the last 6 minutes compressing into something hard and usable. He simply released the physical containment and let it surface. His hands trembled. His breathing went shallow and rapid. He blinked hard 3 times, and the stress and the recycled hospital air did the rest. His eyes went wet at the corners. He pushed open the supply closet door and stepped back into the hallway. He did not look at Rebecca. He did not need to. He walked toward room 114 with the lurching, desperate gait of a man who had been holding himself together for 40 minutes and was finally visibly coming apart at the seams. He pushed the door open. Ethan turned around first, and the performance he delivered in the next 2 seconds was, Richard had to admit, impressive. His son's face crumpled with what looked like overwhelming relief, eyes going glassy, shoulders dropping, one hand coming up to cover his mouth, as though he was fighting back a sob. "Dad." Ethan crossed the room and grabbed Richard by both shoulders, gripping hard. "Thank God. She's stable right now, but they need to move fast. The surgical team is on standby, but they cannot begin prep without the financial authorization on file." Richard let his voice crack. It was not entirely an act. "Where is she? Can I see her?" "She's right here." Ethan steered him toward the bed. Linda looked up at him. Her eyes were soft with something that looked exactly like love. Richard had seen that expression 10,000 times. He looked straight into it and felt the cold thing in his chest expand another inch. "Richard," her voice was gentle, "I'm so sorry to scare you like this." "Don't." He took her hand. His own hand was still shaking, and he did not stop it. "Don't apologize. You focus on getting better." A man in a white coat stepped forward from the corner of the room, early 50s, heavy through the jaw with the careful movements of someone navigating a situation he was not entirely comfortable with. His badge read, Dr. Alan Frost. "Mr. Hayes." Dr. Frost held out a clipboard with the practiced authority of a man who had delivered difficult news in difficult rooms for many years. "I understand this is an overwhelming moment. I want to assure you that we have our best cardiac team ready to mobilize. However, hospital protocol requires a designated financial guarantor on record before we can begin surgical preparation. If you could just sign at the bottom of page 3. Ethan was already at his elbow, pointing at the signature line. "Right there, Dad. It's just a formality. Sign it, and they can start getting her ready." Richard took the clipboard. He looked down at the document, 3 pages of dense legal language liability clauses, stacked on top of indemnification provisions, stacked on top of payment authorization terms. And he did what Ethan had always counted on him doing when he was frightened and exhausted and desperate to help someone he loved. He did not read it. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly the signature came out jagged and uneven, barely legible, the letters collapsing into each other like a man's handwriting when his world is collapsing around him. He handed the clipboard back to Dr. Frost. Ethan exhaled just slightly, just a fraction of a breath, released from somewhere very controlled, and Richard caught it the way you catch a sound you were already listening for. Dr. Frost took the clipboard, nodded professionally, and walked out of the room. Richard stood at his wife's bedside with his shaking hands and his wet eyes, and the voice memo saved to 3 separate cloud servers, and he thought about California Civil Code, Section 1689. And he thought about the 35 years it had taken him to build something worth stealing, and he thought about a gap-toothed 8-year-old boy grinning in a Pasadena driveway. Then he thought about what came next. Rebecca had not moved from the hallway. She stood with her back against the wall outside, room 114, arms crossed over her chest, watching the corridor with the focused stillness of someone who had made a decision she could not take back and was now living inside the consequences of it. Every time a colleague passed, she nodded. Every time someone glanced toward the room, she redirected them with a look that said everything was under control. Nothing was under control. Her phone buzzed in her scrub pocket. She pulled it out expecting a patient update from the floor desk. Instead, the screen showed an unfamiliar number and a text message that made her breath catch in her throat. "This is Sophie Carroll. I'm Ethan Hayes' personal assistant. I don't know who else to contact. I saw something 3 months ago that I think you need to know about. Can you call me, Rebecca stared at the message for 3 full seconds. Then she stepped away from the wall, moved 10 feet down the corridor to a quieter stretch near the supply room, and dialed. Sophie picked up on the first ring. Her voice was tight and breathless, the voice of someone who had been sitting alone in a dark place, working up the nerve to make this call for a very long time. "Are you the nurse who checked in Linda Hayes tonight?" Sophie asked. "I am," Rebecca said, keeping her voice low and even. "Talk to me, Sophie. What did you see?" The story came out in pieces, rushed and slightly fractured at the edges. 3 months ago, Sophie had been working late in the Hayes Innovation office, pulling quarterly reports from the shared server. She had opened the wrong folder. A misfiled document had sent her into a directory she did not have clearance to access, and she had seen an email thread between Ethan and a man named Victor Reynolds. The subject line read, Phase 2, Transfer Schedule. She had read enough to understand what it meant. 2 days later, she had made the mistake of asking Ethan about it directly. "He didn't yell," Sophie said, and her voice cracked slightly on the words. "That was the worst part. He was completely calm. He told me that he had already flagged my unauthorized server access to the company's legal department, and that if I said a single word to anyone about what I'd seen, he would make sure the documentation showed that I had been stealing proprietary files for months." A shaky exhale. "I have a little sister in her first year at USC. I'm the one paying her tuition. I didn't know how to fight that." Rebecca closed her eyes for 1 second. "But you backed up the emails." "The night I found them," Sophie's voice steadied slightly. "I backed up everything to a personal drive before I closed the folder. I didn't know why at the time. Something told me to." "I need you to send those files to me right now," Rebecca said. "Everything you have." A long pause on the line. Rebecca could hear Sophie breathing fast and uneven, the breathing of someone standing at the edge of something they could not unstep from. "If I send those," Sophie said carefully, "there's no going back for me." "Sophie?" Rebecca kept her voice steady the way she kept her voice steady in trauma bays when she needed someone to focus. "There's no going back for any of us tonight. Send the files." 30 seconds of silence. Then Rebecca's phone buzzed with an incoming transfer notification. She opened the first email. The CC line at the top of the thread stopped her cold. Alongside Victor Reynolds' corporate address sat a second email account she did not recognize. It was not a Hayes Innovation address. It was not an Apex Design address. It was a private domain. lhayesprivateconsult.com. Rebecca looked at the metadata timestamp on the account's first activity. 2 years ago, almost to the day. The door to room 114 opened and Richard stepped out into the hallway. His jacket was slightly rumpled, his eyes red at the rims. He looked like a man who had just signed something under tremendous emotional pressure, which was, Rebecca understood now, exactly what he had wanted to look like. She crossed to him in 4 steps and held out her phone without a word. Richard looked at the screen. He read the email address. His jaw tightened, a small, controlled movement, the only crack in an otherwise composed face. "Hayes," he said quietly. Not a question. "Private consulting domain," Rebecca said. "Active for 2 years. Richard handed the phone back. Something moved behind his eyes, not surprise, not grief, but the specific expression of a man watching the last piece of a puzzle lock into place and finding that the completed picture is exactly as bad as he feared. "I need to make a phone call," he said. "Somewhere private." The elevator was empty. Richard stepped in, pressed the button for the parking structure level, and watched the doors close. The moment the gap sealed shut and the car began to drop, something happened in his chest that he had not allowed to happen for the past hour and 15 minutes. His legs went weak. Not dramatically, not in the way of a man collapsing, just a quiet internal buckling like a load-bearing beam that had been holding far more than its rated capacity, finally registering the strain. He put one hand flat against the elevator wall and leaned his weight into it, and for exactly 12 seconds, he let himself be a 62-year-old man whose wife of 35 years had just tried to destroy him. 12 seconds. That was all he took. Then he straightened up, rolled his shoulders back, and called Marcus Webb. Marcus picked up on the second ring. His voice carried the slightly rough quality of a man who had been working late, not tired, just focused the way a blade sounds different when it has been sharpened recently. "Richard?" Not a greeting, a confirmation. "How bad?" Richard had known Marcus Webb for 22 years. In that time, Marcus had walked him through 3 federal contract disputes, 2 hostile acquisition attempts, and 1 supplier fraud case that had nearly cost Hayes Innovation its operating license. Marcus did not require preamble. He required facts in order delivered without emotional decoration. Richard delivered them. He talked for 90 seconds without stopping the phone call from Ethan the hospital, Rebecca's warning, what he had seen through the crack in the door, the 6 minutes and 41 seconds of audio, the Long Beach import scheme, the X7 blueprint transfers. Victor Reynolds and Linda's voice saying, "You did exactly what I told you to do from the very beginning." He did not let his voice break on that last part. He came close. He did not. Marcus was quiet for 4 seconds after Richard finished. In 22 years, Richard had learned that 4 seconds of silence from Marcus Webb meant the man was not processing the information. He had already processed it. He was deciding which problem to address first. "Send me the audio file right now," Marcus said. "While we're on this call, don't wait." The sound of a chair rolling across a hardwood floor came through the speaker. "You said you're still in the building. Parking structure, about to get in my car." "Do not go home," Marcus said, and the flatness in his voice made it sound less like advice and more like a structural fact. "Do not go to the office. Do not make contact with Ethan or Linda tonight. Check into a hotel somewhere downtown, somewhere anonymous. Pay cash if you can." A brief pause. "I need access to Hayes Innovation's financial transaction records going back 8 months. Full authorization in writing tonight." "You'll have it in 3 minutes," Richard said. He pulled up his email as the elevator doors opened into the parking structure. The concrete smell of underground parking motor oil and cold air and faint exhaust hit him as he walked toward the Volvo. He drafted the authorization in 2 minutes, flat attached his digital signature certificate, and sent it to Marcus's secure server before he reached the car. "Got it," Marcus said, already typing in the background. "Richard, how long until the shareholder meeting?" "Friday, 2 o'clock. Marcus exhaled not a sigh, just a controlled release of breath, the kind that meant he was calculating something with a lot of moving parts. 36 hours. It's tight, but it's workable. More typing. "I'll need the audio, Sophie's emails, and whatever Carol finds in the financial system." Speaking of which, Richard's phone buzzed against his ear. Incoming call, Carol Simmons. "Marcus, hold on." He switched lines. "Carol." Carol's voice came through clipped and low, the voice she used when she was in the office late and did not want to be overheard. "Richard, I was running the Q3 reconciliation and I found something in the transaction ledger that doesn't make sense." There are 12 transfers over the past 6 months, small amounts between 8 and 40,000 each moving through intermediary accounts I don't recognize. The routing numbers don't match any vendor in our system. A pause. I was going to call Ethan, but another pause shorter this time, and in it Richard heard 15 years of good instincts doing their job. I called you instead. Richard felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the specific feeling of discovering that the ground under your feet is more solid than you feared. Carol. He kept his voice steady and low. Listen carefully. Print everything you found, every transaction record, every routing number, every account identifier. Then close the ledger and do not touch the system again tonight. He paused. Do not tell Ethan. Do not tell anyone in that building. Can you do that? A beat of silence. Then quietly and without drama, Carol said, Already printing? Good. Richard switched back to Marcus. Did you hear that? Every word, Marcus said. Tell her to bring those printouts to you directly, not to the office, not to anyone else. The typing in the background stopped. Richard, I need you to understand something. If what you've described is accurate, we are looking at federal wire fraud charges, criminal IP theft under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud at the board level. This is not a civil matter. This will not settle quietly. A pause. But it also means that if we do this correctly, if every piece of evidence is clean and documented and properly obtained, they will not be able to walk away from this. Richard sat in the driver's seat of the Volvo without starting the engine. The parking structure was quiet around him, concrete pillars and yellow fluorescent tubes, and the distant sound of a car somewhere above. Then let's do it correctly, he said. Get some sleep, Marcus said. You're going to need it. Richard ended the call. He sat in the car for another 30 seconds, both hands on the steering wheel, not driving anywhere. The audio file was backed up. The authorization was sent. Carol was printing, Marcus was working. 36 hours. He started the engine and drove toward the exit ramp. As the Volvo climbed up through the levels of the parking structure, his phone buzzed one final time. A text message from an unknown number. Mr. Hayes, my name is Detective Lena Park, LAPD Commercial Crimes Division. I need to speak with you, today, before 2 p.m. Friday. Richard read it twice. Then he forwarded it to Marcus without comment and kept driving. I learned what happened in that parking structure later, pieced together from phone records, from what Sophie Carroll told the investigators, and from the things Ethan himself said in the days after Friday, when there was nothing left to protect. This is what I know. Ethan was sitting in his car on level 2 of the Cedars-Sinai parking structure at 11:30 that night, engine running heat on both hands wrapped around his phone. He had just watched Dr. Frost walk the signed liability form to the billing department. He had just watched Richard walk out of room 114 with shaking hands and red eyes, the picture of a man who had been broken open by fear and love and had signed whatever was put in front of him without reading a single word. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. Ethan should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the particular hollowness of a man who has been running so fast for so long that stopping even briefly allows something to catch up with him that he has been working very hard not to look at directly. His phone rang. The name on the screen was not saved as a contact. It did not need to be. Ethan knew that number the way you know the sound of a smoke alarm, not because you hear it often, but because when you do, your body responds before your brain does. He picked up. Ethan! Nathan Cross's voice was the voice of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise it to be frightening. It was quiet, almost conversational, with the flat and patient quality of someone who has all the time in the world and knows that you do not. It's Thursday in 11 hours. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles ached. I know, everything is moving. The authorization is signed and logged. The financial transfer will clear by end of business Friday. I didn't ask about the transfer, Nathan said. I asked about Thursday. Thursday is fine, Ethan said, and hated the way his voice came out. Half a register, too high, half a beat, too fast. Everything is fine, Nathan. A pause on the line. The kind of pause that a man like Nathan Cross used the way other men used words deliberately, with full awareness of the weight it carried. Ethan! The patience in his voice was the most frightening thing about it. You owe me $2,100,000. You have owed me this money for 14 months. In 14 months, you have paid me $160,000 in installments, which means you currently owe me $1,940,000. I have been generous. Another pause. I will not be generous again after Friday. Ethan's chest was so tight he could feel his own heartbeat in his back teeth. He pressed his free hand flat against the steering wheel and pushed hard, needing the resistance of something solid. "You'll have it," he said. "I swear to you, Friday." "I know I'll have it," Nathan said pleasantly, "because the alternative is not something you want to think about on a Wednesday night in a hospital parking lot." The line went dead. Ethan sat with the phone in his hand and stared at the concrete pillar directly in front of his car. His breathing had gone shallow and fast, the breathing of a man who had been treading water for 14 months and could feel his arms giving out. He had not started any of this because he wanted to hurt his father. That was the thing no one would ever believe, and he understood that, and he had made his peace with it, or told himself he had, which was close enough to the same thing when you were too tired to examine the difference. He had started it because of one night in Las Vegas 18 months ago, a private poker room in a hotel off the Strip, whose name he would never say out loud again, and a run of losses so fast and so complete that by the time he understood what was happening, he was already in it for more than $1 million. Nathan Cross had covered the debt. Nathan Cross always covered the debt. That was how men like Nathan Cross operated. They covered the debt and then they owned you. And then one day they called and told you what they needed. And what Nathan Cross had needed was something Ethan had never imagined he would be asked to provide. Access to Hayes Innovation, to the servers, the files, the import accounts, the vendor relationships, to everything his father had built and handed to him piece by piece over 15 years, trusting him with it, the way you trust someone with the thing you love most. Ethan put the phone in the cup holder. He pressed both palms against his eyes until he saw white. His phone buzzed. A text from Victor. "Long Beach shipment cleared final customs inspection. All documentation clean. Everything points to Richard." Ethan typed back, "Good. After Friday, it won't matter." He stared at the message after he sent it, read it back to himself, tried to find something in it that felt like the person he had been before Las Vegas, and could not. His phone rang again, Linda this time. He picked up before the second ring. "It's done," he said. "I know." Her voice was warm and satisfied, the voice she used when something had gone exactly the way she had planned it. "Come home. We'll go over the final details in the morning." Ethan started the engine. He pulled out of the parking space and drove toward the exit ramp, and as the car climbed up through the levels of the structure, he passed a dark Volvo, going the other direction, heading down toward the lower levels. He did not recognize it. He did not know that his father had been in that building for the past 2 hours. He did not know about Rebecca. He did not know about Sophie Carroll, or the emails, or the voice memo running for 6 minutes and 41 seconds on the other side of a supply closet door. He drove out into the Beverly Hills night, heading home, certain that everything was under control. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. Marcus Webb did not sleep that night. He had been working since midnight. I know this because when I called him at 6:15 Thursday morning, he picked up on the first ring with the alert and slightly over-caffeinated energy of a man who had been running on black coffee and momentum for the past 8 hours. His voice had none of the roughness of someone pulled from sleep. It had the sharpened, slightly dangerous quality of someone who had found something and had spent the intervening hours making absolutely certain of what it was before he said a word about it. "Sit down," he said, before I had finished saying his name. I was standing in the parking lot of the Millennium Biltmore Hotel on South Grand Avenue, where I had checked in at midnight under a corporate rate that did not require a credit card imprint if you paid the first night in cash. The morning air was cold and smelled like wet concrete and diesel from the early delivery trucks on Figueroa. I had slept for approximately 3 hours and felt it in every joint. I sat down on a concrete parking barrier and waited. "I've been through the Hayes Innovation transaction records going back 14 months, Marcus said. The sound of papers moving came through the line, actual paper, which meant he had been printing things, which meant whatever he had found was serious enough that he did not want it to exist only on a screen. The transfers Carroll flagged are real, and they are not subtle if you know what you are looking for. 12 transactions ranging from $8,000 to $38,000 each. Each one moves through a different intermediary account before disappearing. "Disappearing where?" I asked. "That's what took me most of the night." A pause, the sound of a page turning. "The first shelled account is registered in Delaware, a company called Meridian Consulting Partners, LLC. No employees, no website, no operating history beyond receiving and forwarding funds. From there, the money moves to a second account in Singapore, held by an entity called Pacific Bridge Advisory Group. Same profile, no operations, no staff exists, only on paper. Another pause. From Singapore, the funds transfer to a third account in the Cayman Islands, a holding company called Lakeview Capital International. I pressed my free hand against my knee to stop it from bouncing. And from the Caymans, Marcus took a breath. Just one. The kind of breath a man takes when he is about to say something that he has been sitting with for several hours and has still not entirely made peace with. From the Cayman account, he said carefully, the funds transfer directly to a private banking account at Banque Privée Edmond de Rothschild in Geneva, Switzerland. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be deliberate. The account is held in the name of Linda Margaret Hayes. The parking lot went very quiet around me. Not because anything changed. The delivery trucks were still running. A pigeon was still working at something near the drain at the far end of the lot. The early morning sky over downtown Los Angeles was still doing its slow burn from black to gray to the particular shade of washed-out blue that meant another clear day was coming. None of that changed. But something in my chest did something I did not have a word for. Not breaking, not dropping. Something more like a very slow, very complete rearrangement, the way a building sounds when its foundation shifts and every load-bearing element above it adjusts to the new geometry. Simultaneously a low and structural groan that no one outside the building can hear. How long has the account been active? My voice came out level. I was proud of that. The first deposit cleared 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days ago, Marcus said. The total amount received across all transfers to date is $4,260,000. He paused. Richard Victor Reynolds did not pay Ethan for the blueprints. He paid Linda. Ethan was moving the files, taking all the legal exposure, and receiving nothing in return except the belief that he was going to inherit a company he had already helped destroy. I stared at the middle distance, somewhere in Beverly Hills. In the house I had paid for and furnished and lived in for 22 years, Linda was presumably asleep, preparing for Friday, confident that by this time tomorrow she would have everything she had been working toward for 2 years and 3 months. She did not know about the supply closet. She did not know about Rebecca or Sophie Carroll, or the voice memo backed up to 3 data centers in 2 states. She did not know that the man she had spent 2 years and 3 months trying to dismantle had spent the last 12 hours building something she could not take apart. Marcus, I said, what happens to the Swiss account when the federal charges are filed? The moment we have an indictment, the DOJ can file an emergency asset restraining order under 18 U.S.C. Section 1345, Marcus said. Simultaneously, the FBI will submit an international freeze request to Swiss authorities under the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, the MLAT. Switzerland has an active MLAT agreement with the United States. The process is not instantaneous. It typically takes 48 to 72 hours for Swiss regulators to act on an emergency request, but the account gets flagged for monitoring the moment the request goes in, which means no withdrawals can process without triggering an immediate alert. A brief pause. Linda will not be able to touch that money once we file. Good, I said. There's one more thing. Marcus's voice shifted slightly, not softer, but more careful the way it got. When he was delivering information he knew would land hard. The first Meridian Consulting transfer, the very first one, 2 years and 3 months ago, the sender account on that transaction is not Apex Design Group. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. Then who sent it? The originating account is registered to a private entity called Hayes Legacy Partners, Marcus said. Incorporated in Delaware 14 months before the first transfer. The registered agent on the filing is the sound of a page turning, Linda Margaret Hayes. I put my free hand over my mouth for a moment, just a moment. Linda had not been recruited by Victor Reynolds. She had built the structure herself, incorporated her own holding company, and then gone looking for a buyer for what she intended to take. Victor Reynolds had not approached her. She had approached him. She's been planning this for at least 3 years, I said. At minimum, Marcus said, possibly longer. I stood up from the concrete barrier. My knees were stiff and my back ached, and the cold morning air was working its way through my jacket in a way that made me feel every one of my 62 years simultaneously. I looked up at the Biltmore's facade, the old terracotta and limestone, solid and permanent against the pale morning sky. "What do we need before Friday?" I asked. Sophie's emails, Carol's printouts, the audit log from the server, and confirmation from the Long Beach Port Authority on the Meridian Freight Manifest. Marcus's chair rolled across the hardwood floor again, the same sound I had heard the night before, the sound of a man in motion. "And we need Detective Park. I looked her up after you forwarded her message. 15 years in commercial crimes. Clean record, solid case closure rate." A pause. "She contacted you before serving a warrant, Richard. That means she is not sure you are guilty. Meet with her." "I will," I said. "Get some coffee," Marcus said. "We have 30 hours. He ended the call. I stood in the cold parking lot with the phone in my hand and thought about a woman who had spent 3 years quietly, methodically, and with extraordinary patience building a machine designed to take everything I had ever made. And then I went inside to get coffee because Marcus was right and there was work to do. What I didn't know until much later, pieced together from the investigation records and from what Detective Park herself told me after Friday, was what happened inside the LAPD Commercial Crimes Division that same night. The file landed on Detective Lena Park's desk at 2:17 in the morning. She had been working late on a separate case, a healthcare billing fraud out of Van Nuys that had been dragging through the discovery phase for 6 months, when her supervisor, Lieutenant Gerald Okafor, dropped a fresh manila folder on top of her keyboard without ceremony and said, "New one, federal referral, commercial crimes wants it by end of week." Lena set down her coffee, pulled the folder toward her, and opened it. The case summary on the top sheet was clean and efficiently written, the kind of summary that arrived pre-organized, pre-highlighted, with the key figures already bolded and the timeline already formatted. In 15 years, working commercial crimes, Lena had learned that evidence packages this neat almost never came from legitimate whistleblowers. Legitimate whistleblowers were scared and disorganized and left things out. Evidence packages this neat came from people who had prepared them in advance. She read the summary anyway. The subject was Richard Hayes, 62, founder and CEO of Hayes Innovation, studio headquartered at 1 Bunker Hill, downtown Los Angeles. The alleged violations were federal smuggling under 18 U.S.C., Section 545 wire fraud under Section 1343, and criminal misappropriation of import licensing privileges. The supporting documentation included customs intake records from the Port of Long Beach internal company, financial logs, and a series of vendor invoices, all of them, Lena noted, naming Hayes Innovation Studio as the responsible party, with a consistency that felt less like documentation and more like decoration. She turned to the photograph clipped to the inside cover. Richard Hayes looked back at her from a corporate headshot, the kind taken in good light by a professional photographer, the subject wearing a dark suit and the particular expression of a man who was accustomed to being the most experienced person in any room he walked into. Silver-haired, broad across the shoulders, with lines around his eyes that came from decades of focus rather than worry. Lena knew that face. She had not seen it in person for 20 years, but she knew it. She had been 19 years old, a freshman at the University of Southern California, on a partial academic scholarship that had covered tuition but not housing, not books, not the 100 small expenses that turned out to add up to an amount her family in Koreatown simply did not have. She had been 3 weeks from withdrawing when a letter arrived from the Hayes Innovation Community Scholarship Fund, notifying her that she had been selected as a recipient of a full supplemental award, covering her remaining expenses for all 4 years. She had never met Richard Hayes. She had written him a thank you letter that she suspected had never been read by him personally. She had gone on to graduate with honors, join the LAPD, and spend 15 years building a record she was proud of. She had never forgotten the name on that letter. Lena set the photograph down. She looked at the evidence package again, the clean formatting, the pre-highlighted figures, the almost architectural neatness of it, and she thought about something her training officer had told her on her first week in the field. The only time evidence is this organized is when someone organized it for you. And the only reason someone organizes evidence for you is because they want you looking in a specific direction, so you do not look in any other. She picked up the folder and walked to Lieutenant Okafor's office. He looked up from his own paperwork. "Problem, possible planted evidence situation," Lena said. She kept her voice neutral and professional. This was not a personal matter. It was a procedural one, and she was going to treat it exactly that way. Before I open a formal investigation on the subject, I want to run a source verification on the evidence package. Confirm the chain of custody, trace the origin of the anonymous tip, establish whether the documentation was compiled externally before submission. She paused. Standard protocol for potential setup scenarios. Okafor studied her for a moment. He had worked with Lena for 6 years. He knew she did not bring things to his office without a reason. How long do you need? He asked. 24 hours, she said. He nodded once. You have it. Document everything. Lena went back to her desk and called Martinez. Detective Ray Martinez was her partner of 4 years. Methodical, technically gifted, and constitutionally incapable of leaving a loose thread alone once he had noticed it. She explained what she needed in 3 sentences. He was already at his keyboard before she finished the third. Anonymous tip came in through the department's online portal, Martinez said 18 minutes later. Submitted through a commercial VPN service, the IP is masked at the submission point. The sound of rapid typing. But the VPN provider's traffic logs show the originating connection before the proxy layer activated. A pause. Lena, the originating IP address is registered to a commercial building account at 1 Bunker Hill, downtown Los Angeles. Lena felt something sharpen behind her eyes. That's Hayes Innovations' address. Exact floor and suite, Martinez confirmed. The tip was submitted from inside the company being investigated. Someone in that building filed an anonymous complaint against their own CEO, routed it through a VPN to make it look external, and packaged the supporting documents so cleanly that it was designed to land on someone's desk looking like a finished case. Lena looked at the photograph of Richard Hayes. Then she opened her system and typed a new name into the search field. Ethan Hayes, 34 years old. Current position, Senior Vice President of Operations, Hayes Innovation Studio. The results loaded. Lena sat back in her chair so fast it rolled 6 inches across the floor. Ethan Hayes had a file. Not a conviction, not an arrest, but a file. A complaint filed 14 months ago by a private creditor named Nathan A. Cross, alleging fraudulent non-payment of a private loan agreement in the amount of $2,100,000. The complaint had been withdrawn 4 months later, after a partial payment was received. Nathan Cross. Lena knew that name. Nathan Cross operated in the gray edges of Los Angeles' private lending market, not technically illegal, not technically anything, but present in enough commercial crimes, adjacencies over the years, that his name had a folder of its own in the division's informal reference files. Ethan Hayes owed Nathan Cross almost $2 million. And Ethan Hayes worked in the building that had just anonymously reported his own father to federal law enforcement. Lena pulled out her personal phone, not her department line, and searched for Richard Hayes' direct contact information through Hayes Innovations' public website. She found a general inquiry email and a main office number. Neither was what she needed. She tried a different search. Hayes Innovation Studio Investor Relations. The page loaded and listed a direct communications contact with a mobile number for media and investor inquiries. Lena typed a text message, kept it short, kept it professional, did not put anything in it that she could not defend in front of a review board. She hit send. Then she pulled Richard Hayes' photograph out of the folder, set it beside her keyboard, and went back to work. I had been sitting in the Volvo in the Century City parking structure for 20 minutes when my phone rang with a number I did not immediately recognize. The area code was 619, San Diego. I picked up. Richard? The voice was older than I remembered, slower, with more gravel in it, the voice of a man who had spent the decades since his retirement learning what it felt like to let time move at its own pace. It's James Kowalski. I straightened in the driver's seat. James Kowalski had been my partner for the first 11 years of Hayes Innovations' existence, the man who had sat across from me at that folding table in the Pasadena garage, who had argued with me about load tolerances and material costs and profit margins until 2 in the morning, more times than either of us could count. He had retired to San Diego 10 years ago, and we spoke perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, the way men do when they have shared something important, and let the distance of time settle between them without letting it become estrangement. James, I said, it's good to hear your voice. I wish I was calling under better circumstances. A pause, not the comfortable pause of old friends, but the weighted pause of a man who had been carrying something and had finally made the decision to set it down. Carol called me last night. She didn't tell me everything, but she told me enough. Richard, there's something I should have told you a long time ago, and I didn't. And I need you to understand that I am sorrier for that than I know how to say. Something in my chest went very still. Tell me now, I said. James exhaled. The sound of it came through the phone line like the last air leaving a room. 2 years ago, maybe 2 years and 4 months. I would have to check my calendar. Victor Reynolds contacted me. Cold call out of nowhere. He said he'd been following Hayes Innovation's trajectory and wanted to explore what he called a strategic information partnership, which is a very clean way of saying he wanted me to tell him things about the company that he had no business knowing. I kept my voice flat. What did you tell him? I told him to go to hell, James said, and for just a moment, the old sharpness was back in his voice, the voice of the man who had argued with me about load tolerances at 2 a.m. I wasn't polite about it. I told him I had no interest in anything he was offering, and that if he contacted me again, I would report the conversation to you directly. A pause. And then I didn't report it to you, because by the time I'd calmed down enough to think about it, I told myself it was nothing a fishing expedition by a competitor. Nothing came of it. No need to stir things up. His voice dropped. I told myself that for 2 years. James. I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose. Who introduced Victor Reynolds to you? The pause that followed was 3 seconds long. I counted them. Linda, James said. She called me the week before Victor did. She said an old acquaintance of hers might be reaching out about some consulting work, and she hoped I'd give him a fair hearing. Another pause. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Linda had always been good at networking. I assumed it was a routine introduction. The parking structure was very quiet around me. Somewhere above a car door slammed, and the sound echoed down through the concrete levels and faded. Linda had called James the week before Victor reached out. She had prepared the introduction. She had made sure the path was clear before Victor walked down it, and when James had refused and failed to tell me, she had simply found another way in. She had found Ethan. The 3 years of preparation that Marcus had identified in the financial records suddenly had a shape I could see clearly. Linda had not woken up one morning and decided to do this. She had mapped it out who to approach in what order, through what channels, the way you map out the architecture of a complex structure before you lay the first brick. She had been patient in a way that required genuine belief that the thing at the end of it was worth every day of the wait. Richard, James's voice was rough with something that sounded like it had been building for a long time. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix any of what's happening, but I am. I am deeply, genuinely sorry. I know you are, I said. And I meant it. James had made a mistake, a significant one that I would have made differently, but he was not a bad man. He was a good man who had told himself a comfortable story and lived inside it for 2 years, the way good people sometimes did when the truth was too complicated and the comfortable story was right there, easy and available. I understood that impulse better than I wanted to. Is there anything I can do? James asked. Anything at all, you name it. Yes, I said. Write down exactly what you just told me. The date of Linda's call, the date of Victor's contact, everything he said, everything you said. Sign it and get it notarized today. Then send a copy to Marcus Webb and keep one for yourself. I'll have it done by noon, James said without hesitation. Thank you, James. I ended the call, and then I sat in the car. I did not reach for my phone. I did not check my messages. I did not run the timeline in my head or calculate what James's statement would add to the evidence package or think about Friday or Marcus or Detective Park or any of the moving pieces that had been consuming every available corner of my mind for the past 10 hours. I just sat. The parking structure was the particular kind of quiet that exists underground, muffled gray insulated from the city above by several feet of concrete and rebar. A fluorescent tube somewhere on the level above was flickering. I could hear the faint electrical stutter of it, a small rhythmic malfunction in an otherwise indifferent system. Linda had called James Kowalski to prepare the introduction to Victor Reynolds 2 years, 4 months ago. 2 years and 4 months ago, Linda and I had been sitting in our kitchen on a Sunday morning. I remembered the specific Sunday, or thought I did the particular quality of the light through the kitchen windows, the way the coffee had been too hot, and I had burned the roof of my mouth, the way Linda had laughed at something in the newspaper, and turned the page with the easy, unhurried movement of a woman with nowhere she needed to be. I had reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She had turned her hand over and held mine back. I pressed my eyes shut in the front seat of the Volvo, and I held the weight of that memory for the full 4 minutes. I had promised myself the burning coffee, and the newspaper, and the morning light, and her hand turning in mine, and I let it be exactly as heavy as it was, because it deserved that. 35 years deserved that. Even the false parts of it deserved that. Maybe, especially those. Then I opened my eyes. I looked at the dashboard clock. 7:49 in the morning, Marcus and Carol were waiting for me in a coffee shop on Little Santa Monica Boulevard, 8 minutes away. 28 hours until the shareholder meeting. I started the engine. The coffee shop on Little Santa Monica Boulevard was the kind of place that existed in every corner of Century City. Small, expensive, competently staffed and designed with the specific understanding that its primary clientele were people who needed somewhere to have conversations they did not want overheard in their offices. Marcus was already there when I arrived. He had taken a corner table with his back to the wall and his face toward the door, which was either professional habit or paranoia, and in 22 years I had never been able to determine which. A legal pad covered in handwritten notes sat beside his coffee cup. The pen in his hand was moving before I had fully sat down. Carol arrived 4 minutes later, slightly out of breath, a manila folder tucked under one arm, and her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. She had clearly come directly from the office, her badge was still clipped to her jacket lapel, and she set the folder on the table between us, with the controlled urgency of someone who had been waiting to put something down for several hours. "Start with Carol," Marcus said, without looking up from his legal pad. Carol opened the folder. Her hands were steady, but there was a tightness around her eyes that told me she had not slept much either. 12 transactions over 6 months, she said. I've printed every record to the originating account numbers, the intermediary routing codes, the timestamps. She laid the papers out on the table in a precise row, left to right, oldest to newest. Each transfer is small enough to avoid automatic flagging under the Bank Secrecy Act's $10,000 reporting threshold. The amounts range from $8,000 to $38,000. Whoever structured these knew exactly what they were doing. Ethan has had access to the financial management system for 3 years, Marcus said, making a note. He would know the thresholds. There's more. Carol pulled a second set of papers from the folder. I accessed the server audit log last night, the activity record that tracks every login, every file, access, every download in the Hayes Innovation System. She placed the papers in front of me. Ethan's credentials were used to access the X7 design directory 47 times over the past 3 months. The files were opened, copied to a temporary buffer, and the buffer was cleared each time, but the metadata of the original files retained a modification flag. She pointed to a column of timestamps on the top sheet. These are the dates and times of each access. The pattern is consistent with someone systematically extracting data in small batches to avoid triggering the system's bulk download alert. I looked at the timestamps. They were regular, spaced roughly 4 to 5 days apart, always between 9 and 11 in the evening after the office had emptied, when the system traffic was low enough that an unusual access pattern would not stand out against the background noise of normal operations. 47 times. My son had gone into the system 47 times and taken pieces of the thing I had spent 22 years building, 4 to 5 days at a time, careful and patient and quiet. I set the paper down before my hands could do something I did not want them to do. The audio recording, Marcus said, moving forward with the efficiency of a man who understood that grief was a thing you scheduled for later. 6 minutes and 41 seconds. I had it reviewed by a forensic audio specialist I work with this morning. The recording is clean, unedited, and the voices are clearly identifiable. It will hold up. He made another note. Sophie Carroll's emails, I've reviewed all 43 of them. They document a clear pattern of communication between Ethan Hayes and Victor Reynolds beginning 14 weeks ago, including 2 emails in which Ethan explicitly references transferring design files and confirms receipt of payment instructions. He looked up. Those emails constitute direct evidence of wire fraud and criminal misappropriation under the Defend Trade Secrets Act. The payment instructions reference the Meridian Consulting account, which connects directly to the Cayman chain I found last night. He reached into his briefcase and produced a USB drive, which he set on the table beside Carol's papers. Everything is on here, he said. The financial chain documentation, the server audit log, the audio file, Sophie's emails, and the Long Beach Customs records I obtained this morning from the Port Authority through a records request. He paused. The customs records confirm that the Meridian Freight Manifest the one that lists Hayes Innovation as the importer of record for 14 containers of unlicensed industrial materials was filed using Hayes Innovation's registered importer ID number. The ID number was accessed from the company's internal vendor management system. He looked at Carol. Who has access to that system? Decize me for one. Senior management level and above, Carol said. Richard, Ethan, myself, and 2 department heads. So Ethan had access, Marcus said. Yes. Marcus capped his pen and set it down. He looked at me across the table with the expression he wore when he had finished building something and was about to tell you whether it would hold. Richard, he said, what we have right now is sufficient to support federal charges on 3 separate counts: criminal IP theft under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, wire fraud under 18 U.S.C., Section 1343, and conspiracy to commit federal smuggling under Section 545. We also have the financial chain connecting Victor Reynolds to Linda's Swiss account, which gives us a 4th count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. He paused. This is not a civil matter. This is not something that gets settled quietly in mediation. If we take this to the FBI today, Ethan Hayes and Victor Reynolds are looking at potential federal prison sentences. The word prison sat on the table between us like something physical. I had known it was coming. I had known it since the supply closet. But hearing Marcus say it with the flat and factual precision he reserved for things that were simply true, not argued, not speculated, simply true, made it land differently than knowing it had. Ethan, my son, federal prison. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold while Carol was presenting, and the cold of it against the back of my throat was grounding in a way I needed. What about Linda? I asked. The Swiss account and the Hayes Legacy, Partners Incorporation, give us conspiracy and money laundering, Marcus said. Her direct exposure is significant. He paused. James Kowalski's notarized statement when it arrives will add conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Another pause. Richard Linda planned this for at least 3 years. The sentencing guidelines for the charges she is facing are not lenient. I nodded once. I did not trust my voice with anything more than that. My phone buzzed on the table. I looked at the screen, the text message from the unknown number, the one I had forwarded to Marcus the night before, without comment. Marcus had already seen it. Detective Park, he said. I did more research on her this morning. 15 years in commercial crimes, clean disciplinary record case, closure rate that puts her in the top 8% of the division. He picked up at his coffee. She reached out to you before serving a warrant, which means she is not operating on the assumption of your guilt. Meet with her. Today. I typed a reply to Lena Park's message. Name the place, I wrote. The response came back in under 30 seconds. Grand Central Market, downtown, 1 hour. I set the phone down and looked at Marcus, then at Carol. Carol was straightening the papers back into the folder with the careful movements of someone who needed something to do with her hands. Her jaw was set in the way it got when she was holding something in. Carol, I said. She looked up. Thank you, I said. For calling me instead of Ethan. Something moved across Carol's face. Not quite a smile, not quite tears, but something in the territory between them. The expression of a person who had made a decision they were not entirely sure was safe and had just been told it was the right one. 15 years, she said simply. I know which Hayes built this company. I stood up, put on my jacket, and picked up the USB drive from the table. 26 hours until the shareholder meeting. Grand Central Market had been feeding downtown Los Angeles since 1917. And on a Thursday morning, it moved with the particular organized chaos of a place that had never once in its history been quiet. I found a table near the back away from the produce stalls and the lunch counter crowds in a corner where the ambient noise of the market created a wall of sound that made conversation private without requiring anyone to lower their voice. Marcus sat beside me. We had been there 4 minutes when Lena Park walked through the entrance on Broadway. She was smaller than I had expected, compact and quick-moving, with the alert posture of someone whose job had trained her to assess a room in the first 3 seconds of entering it. She spotted us without appearing to look for us, crossed the market floor without hesitation, and sat down across from me with her badge placed flat on the table between us. Mr. Hayes. Her voice was direct, not unfriendly, but not warm. Either the voice of someone who had decided that professional clarity was the most respectful thing she could offer right now. I want to be straight with you from the start. I received a case file 2 nights ago with your name on it. Federal smuggling, wire fraud, criminal IP violations. She held my gaze. I've been doing this for 15 years. Evidence packages don't arrive that clean unless someone cleaned them. Someone did, I said. I know. She reached into the bag beside her chair and produced a printed sheet, a screenshot of the IP trace Martinez had run. She slid it across the table. The anonymous complaint was submitted through a commercial VPN, but the originating connection before the proxy activated came from One Bunker Hill. Your building, your company's server block. She paused. Someone inside Hayes Innovation filed a federal complaint against you and tried to make it look external. Marcus picked up the sheet, examined it, and set it down without comment. There's more, Lena said. I ran Ethan Hayes through our system. 14 months ago, a private creditor named Nathan Cross filed a civil complaint against your son for non-payment of a private loan, $2,100,000. The complaint was withdrawn 4 months later after partial payment. She leaned forward slightly. Nathan Cross is not a bank, Mr. Hayes. He is not a licensed lender. He operates in a part of the private lending market that my division has been watching for 3 years. People who borrow from Nathan Cross don't take out loans for business investments. They take them out because they've lost money they don't have, I said. Yes, Lena said. And then Nathan Cross owns them. The market noise moved around us, a vendor calling out prices, the hiss of something hitting a hot griddle. 2 stalls away, the particular percussion of a city going about its mourning. I thought about Ethan in that parking structure, knuckles white around his phone voice, climbing half a register when Nathan said, Friday. I slid the USB drive across the table to Lena. Audio recording from Wednesday night, I said. 6 minutes and 41 seconds, 43 emails between my son and Victor Reynolds documenting the IP transfers. Server audit logs showing 47 unauthorized access events on the X7 design directory. Long Beach customs records. Financial chain documentation from 3 shell companies through the Cayman Islands to a private Swiss account. I paused. The Swiss account is held in my wife's name. Lena looked at the USB drive. She did not pick it up immediately. She looked at it the way someone looks at something when they are making a decision about what picking it up will mean. Then she picked it up. Give me until Friday morning, she said. I'll have a federal warrant ready before 2 o'clock. She looked up at me. Don't let them know you're coming, Mr. Hayes. The element of surprise is the only advantage you have left. She put the USB in her bag and looked at me one final time before she turned to go. One more thing, she said. I know who you are. That's why I'm sitting here instead of serving you a warrant. She did not wait for a response. She moved back through the market crowd and was gone. Marcus watched her go. Then he looked at me. 24 hours, he said. I know, I said. I sat back in my chair and looked at the Broadway entrance through which Lena Park had just disappeared, and I thought about a USB drive and what it contained and what it was about to do, and how nothing after Friday would look the way it had looked before Wednesday night. Then I stood up and walked out into the Los Angeles morning. Linda called 4 times between Thursday afternoon and Friday morning. I watched each call come in from the Biltmore hotel room, phone face up on the nightstand, and I did not pick up. The first call came at 6:17 Thursday evening. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in my jacket, staring at the wall across from me, doing the particular kind of thinking that does not look like thinking from the outside. The second came at 9:40, while I was standing at the window watching the lights on Pershing Square. The third at 11:52, after I had lain down without undressing, flat on top of the covers with my eyes open in the dark. The fourth at 2:30 in the morning, and by then, I had finally fallen into something shallow and dreamless that passed for sleep, and I did not hear it ring. I woke at 5:45. I had been in the same clothes for 36 hours. I washed my face, straightened my jacket as well as it could be straightened after a night on a hotel bedspread, and walked to the Starbucks on Figueroa that opened at 6. I drank 2 coffees standing at the counter and did not speak to anyone. At 7:15, I walked the 5 minutes from the Biltmore to One Bunker Hill and took the elevator to the 28th floor. I used my key card to enter through the side door and went to my office, which was exactly as I had left it. Wednesday night lights still on, blueprint still on the floor where it had fallen when I dropped it. I picked up the blueprint, rolled it carefully, set it on the desk. Then I went back to the elevator and rode it down to the lobby, and I sat in a chair near the security desk, where I could see the main entrance, and I waited. Ethan arrived at 8:03. He came through the revolving door on Bunker Hill Avenue with the particular energy of a man who believed he was walking toward the best day of his professional life, shoulders back pace, controlled the slight forward lean of someone moving with purpose. He was wearing the navy suit he saved for important presentations. His shoes were polished. He had gotten a haircut sometime in the last 24 hours. He looked, I thought, like my son. He looked exactly like my son. I stayed where I was. He did not see me. He crossed the lobby, nodded to the security guard, and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. I gave it 3 minutes. Then I took the next elevator up. The 28th floor was already running. When I stepped off, phones ringing at the reception desk, the low hum of conversation from the open plan area, the smell of fresh coffee from the break room. A normal Friday morning. Nobody knew yet that the building they were sitting in was about to change in ways that could not be undone. I was passing the cluster of assistant desks near the east wing when I saw Sophie Carroll. She was standing at her workstation, Ethan's workstation, technically the cluster of desks just outside his office, and she was emptying her drawer into a canvas tote bag, with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who had made a decision in the middle of the night and had spent the hours since then making peace with it. A framed photograph, a coffee mug, a small plant in a terracotta pot that she wrapped in a paper towel before placing it in the bag. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were red at the rims and slightly swollen in the way that comes from crying that has already finished rather than crying that is about to start. She had done her grieving earlier, somewhere private, and what was left now was just the aftermath of it. "Sophie," I said. I kept my voice low. "You don't have to do this today." "Yes, I do." She zipped the tote bag closed. Her hands were not shaking, which told me the decision had been made long enough ago that her body had caught up with it. "I sent those emails to Rebecca on Wednesday night, and I haven't slept since. I can't sit outside his office and answer his calls and pretend I don't know what I know." She looked at me directly. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." "You said something when it mattered," I told her. "That's what counts." She picked up the tote bag. She looked like she wanted to say something else and then decided against it, and she walked toward the elevator with the straight-backed posture of someone who was holding themselves together through sheer determination and would hold themselves together until they were somewhere private enough to stop. I watched her go. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with the situation and everything to do with the fact that a 28-year-old woman had just paid a price for doing the right thing, and there was nothing I could do to make that cost smaller. From the far end of the hallway, Ethan's office door opened. He stepped out, phone to his ear mid-conversation with someone I could not hear. He was nodding at whatever was being said, his expression confident and contained the expression of a man who believed the outcome of the next 6 hours was already determined. He saw me. The phone call did not stop. He kept nodding into it, but his eyes found mine across the length of the hallway, 30 feet of industrial carpet and recessed lighting between us. And for the first time since Wednesday night, my son and I were looking directly at each other. I did not look away. Neither did he. Then I nodded once, a single small movement, the kind you make when you want someone to know that you see them fully and completely, and that you are not afraid of what either of you is about to do. I turned and walked toward the conference room. Behind me, I heard Ethan say something quick and clipped into the phone. Then I heard him dial again immediately. "Victor," he said. His voice carried just far enough. "My father is in the building." I kept walking. 36 hours. That's how long Richard had. Before I take you into that room on the 28th floor, comment 36, so I know you made it this far. You've earned what's coming. Also, some elements of this story are fictional, added for entertainment and educational value. If that's not what you're here for, feel free to stop right here. The 6 hours between 8 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon were the longest of my life. I spent them in my office with the door closed, working through everything Marcus had sent me one final time, not because I needed to review it again, but because having something concrete to do with my hands was the only thing standing between me and the specific kind of stillness that comes when you have done everything you can do, and all that remains is to wait for the consequence of it. I read every email in Sophie's backup. I listened to the first 40 seconds of the audio recording, then stopped it. I did not need to hear it again. I had heard it enough times that I could reconstruct it, word for word from memory, and doing so served no purpose except to make the next 5 hours feel longer than they already did. At 12:30, Carol knocked and came in without waiting for an answer, which was something she had never done before in 15 years. She set a sandwich on my desk, turkey on sourdough from the deli on the ground floor. She had also brought real coffee from the good machine in the executive suite, not the break room pot. "You haven't eaten since yesterday morning," she said. It was not a question. I looked at the sandwich. My stomach felt like something that had been wrung out and left to dry, and the idea of eating in it seemed almost insulting. But Carol was standing there with the particular expression she wore when she had decided something was going to happen and was simply waiting for the other person to catch up. I picked up the sandwich and took a bite. "Thank you," I said. Carol sat down in the chair across from my desk, the chair where clients sat, where I had conducted 1,000 meetings over the years. And she folded her hands in her lap and looked at me with the steady, clear-eyed attention of someone who had decided that the most useful thing she could do right now was simply be present. "Are you ready?" she asked. I thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved to be thought about. "No," I said, "but I don't think ready is the point." Carol nodded once, as though that was exactly the right answer, and stood up and left. The shareholder conference room on the 28th floor had been designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the west wall framed the Los Angeles skyline in a way that made the city look like something that had been arranged specifically for the benefit of the people sitting at the table. The Santa Monica Mountains in the distance, the grid of Wilshire Boulevard running straight and certain toward the ocean. The particular afternoon light of a clear Southern California Friday that turned everything gold and significant. I had chosen this room deliberately when we had moved into the building 11 years ago. I had wanted a space that reminded people when they sat down in it of what they were part of. 12 shareholders were already seated when I arrived at 1:55. They were the people who had believed in Hayes Innovation, long enough to own a piece of it, a retired aerospace engineer from Pasadena who had invested in the company's second year, a venture capital firm out of Santa Monica that had come in during the Series B round of family office from Newport Beach that had been on the cap table for 9 years. People who had trusted me with their money and their faith for a long time. They looked up when I walked in, and the expressions on their faces were a mixture of things I did not have time to catalog. Individually, concern, uncertainty. The slightly braced quality of people who had been told an emergency meeting was necessary, and had spent the intervening hours imagining what that might mean. Carol was already seated at the far end of the table. She met my eyes and gave me nothing. No nod, no signal, just the steady neutral attention of someone holding a position and waiting. Victor Reynolds sat in a chair along the right wall, slightly apart from the shareholder table, the position Ethan had designated for him as an independent advisor, which gave him presence in the room without formal standing. He was impeccably dressed and completely still, and he watched me enter with the expression of a man who believed the outcome of this meeting had already been decided. Ethan stood at the head of the table. He had his presentation materials arranged on the laptop in front of him, the main display screen already showing the Hayes Innovation logo against a dark background waiting. He looked up when I walked in, and something moved very briefly across his face, something that, in another context, in another life, I might have identified as guilt, and then it was gone, replaced by the composed and regretful expression of a man about to deliver difficult news for the benefit of people he cared about. He was good at this. He had learned it somewhere, and I had a feeling I knew from whom. "Dad." He said it with exactly the right weight, not too much, not too little, the voice of a son who was grieving something, even as he was doing it. "I'm glad you're here. I think it's important that you hear this directly." The shareholders shifted in their chairs. Someone cleared their throat. I walked to the table. I did not go to the far end where latecomers typically sat. I walked to the center of the long side of the table, the position from which I could see everyone in the room simultaneously. And they could all see me, and I set the USB drive down on the polished surface, with a sound that was very small in the room, but somehow carried to every corner of it. 12 people looked at the USB drive. Then they looked at me. Ethan looked at the USB drive. His hands resting on the edge of the laptop went very still. "Before we begin," I said, and my voice came out level and clear and entirely without the tremor that I had spent 36 hours afraid it would carry, "there is something that everyone in this room needs to hear." I picked up the USB drive and plugged it into the laptop port on the table. The presentation screen went dark for a moment. Then it switched inputs. Ethan's face changed. It was not a dramatic change, not the kind of thing you would notice if you were not specifically watching for it. not the kind of collapse that announces itself. It was a small internal rearrangement, the kind that happens when a person realizes in a single instant that the landscape they believed they were standing in has turned out to be something else entirely. I had been watching my son's face for 34 years. I knew every version of it. This was the version I had never seen before. Before any decisions are made in this room today, I said, looking at the 12 shareholders, at Victor Reynolds, at Carol, and finally at Ethan, I am going to play you a recording. It is 6 minutes and 41 seconds long. I need you to listen to all of it. I pressed play. The room filled with sound. The recording lasted 6 minutes and 41 seconds. No one in that room moved for all of it. I watched their faces the way you watch a room when you need to understand what is happening in it. Not any single face, but the whole of them, the collective shift that moves through a group of people when they are hearing something that is rearranging their understanding of where they are and what they are part of. The retired aerospace engineer from Pasadena put both hands flat on the table within the first 30 seconds. The venture capital partner from Santa Monica took off her reading glasses and set them down and did not put them back on. 3 people reached for their phones and then stopped themselves, understanding instinctively that whatever they were about to do with those phones could wait until they had heard all of it. Victor Reynolds did not move at all. He sat with his hands in his lap and his face arranged in the specific expression of a man running calculations, not panicking, not denying, simply processing the way a very controlled person processes information that has just changed every variable in the equation they were working from. And Ethan. Ethan stood at the head of the table and listened to his own voice come out of the laptop. Speakers, and the thing that happened to his face over the course of 6 minutes and 41 seconds was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not because it was dramatic, because it was not. It was quiet, and it was incremental, and it was the specific expression of a man watching the architecture of something he built collapse in a way that cannot be stopped and cannot be reversed, one load-bearing element at a time. When Linda's voice came through the speakers, warm and satisfied, and entirely unmistakably hers, I heard one of the shareholders draw in a sharp breath. 2 others exchanged a look. Carol, at the far end of the table, closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds and then opened them again. Ethan's jaw tightened. That was all. Just that. The recording ended. The room was very quiet in the way that rooms are quiet after something loud has happened. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of the space where sound had been still ringing slightly at the edges. I reached forward and advanced to the next file. These are 43 emails. I said, keeping my voice the same register it had been since I walked in, level factual, the voice I used in depositions and contract negotiations. The voice that meant I was not going to be moved from what I was saying, regardless of what anyone in the room tried to do about it. They were exchanged between Ethan Hayes and Victor Reynolds over a 14-week period beginning 3.5 months ago. I'm going to show you 3 of them. The rest are documented in the materials that will be submitted to federal investigators this afternoon. I advanced through the slides. The emails appeared on the screen, one at a time. Subject lines, timestamps, the specific language of men, discussing the transfer of intellectual property they did not own, with the casual efficiency of people who believed they were not being observed. I did not editorialize. I did not explain. I let the words do what words do when they are real. Victor Reynolds uncrossed and recrossed his legs. The next slide was the server audit log, the column of 47 timestamps, the login credentials, the metadata modification flags on the X7 design files. Carol had organized it into a single clean page with the relevant entries highlighted in yellow, and the effect of seeing it laid out that way was the effect of seeing something that had been hidden in plain sight suddenly made visible, not shocking, but clarifying the way a room looks when someone turns on a light. 47 unauthorized access events, I said, all occurring between 9 and 11 in the evening, all using the same login credentials, all resulting in file access and partial extraction of the X7 design directory. I paused. The X7 is the product we are scheduled to launch in the 4th quarter. It represents 11 years of development and an estimated market value of $63 million in first-year revenue projections. Someone at the table made a sound that was not quite a word. The next slide was the Long Beach Customs records. The Meridian Freight manifests the 14 containers, the Hayes Innovation Importer ID number, used to clear the materials through federal customs inspection. I walked them through it in 4 sentences. I did not need more than that. The document was self-explanatory in the way that damning things often are. And then I advanced to the last slide. It was a single page. Marcus had formatted it cleanly, the financial chain laid out in a simple diagram, arrows moving left to right, each entity named and dated. Meridian Consulting Partners, LLC in Delaware. Pacific Bridge Advisory Group in Singapore. Lakeview Capital International in the Cayman Islands. And at the end of the chain, the final destination. Banque Privée, Edmond de Rothschild. Geneva, Switzerland. Account holder, Linda Margaret Hayes. Total deposits received $4,260,000. Date of first deposit 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days ago. I did not say anything. I let the room read it. I watched Ethan read it. He read it the way you read something, when you already know what it says, but your eyes are moving across it anyway, because some part of you is still hoping that what you thought it said is not actually what it says. His lips moved slightly on the account holder name. Just slightly, just enough. And then something happened in Ethan Hayes' face that I had not seen coming and had not prepared myself for, which was perhaps the only thing in the past 48 hours that I had failed to anticipate. His eyes filled with tears, not the performative tears of a man trying to generate sympathy, not the calculated grief of the performance he had put on in room 114 on Wednesday night. These were different, younger, rawer, the tears of a 34-year-old man who had just understood in a single moment of looking at a slide on a conference room screen that the person who had sent him down this road had built a private exit for herself and had never at any point built one for him. He had taken all of the legal exposure. He had moved the files. He had arranged the Long Beach shipment. He had made the calls to Nathan Cross and the promises to Victor and the plan to file the anonymous complaint. He had done all of it, and his mother had taken $4 million and opened a private account in Switzerland and had never once mentioned it to him. He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at Victor Reynolds. Victor looked back at him with the expression of a man who had already, in the 30 seconds since the slide appeared, begun calculating his cooperation options with federal prosecutors. Ethan's tears spilled over. He did not wipe them away. He stood at the head of the table with tears running down his face and looked at the man who had been his partner in this and understood with the terrible completeness of a thing that cannot be unknown once it is known that he had never had a partner at all. He had had a transaction. Dad! His voice broke on the word, broke completely in the way it had broken on the phone on Wednesday night, except that this time there was nothing performed about it. This was just the sound of it. Dad, Ethan. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Not cold, just quiet. The quietness of someone who has already done their grieving and is standing on the other side of it. Don't say anything else right now. Let your attorney speak for you from this point forward. The door opened. Detective Lena Park walked in. She was followed by 3 people in dark suits whose posture and the specific way they moved through a doorway identified them before their credentials did. She held her badge up for the room to scan the table and found what she was looking for. Ethan Hayes, she said. Victor Reynolds. Her voice was the voice she used in the field. Not loud, not theatrical, simply the voice of the inevitable. You are both under arrest. Please stand and keep your hands visible. Victor Reynolds stood first. He did it the way he did everything, with control, with deliberateness, with the specific economy of movement of a man who understood that how you behaved in the moment of your arrest was information that could be used against you or for you, depending on how you managed it. He straightened his jacket. He placed his hands in front of him. He looked at one of the FBI agents and said in a voice that betrayed nothing, "I would like to contact my attorney before any further conversation takes place." The agent nodded. It was not an acknowledgement of agreement. It was the nod of someone who had heard that sentence many times and had long since stopped finding it interesting. Victor was led out first. He did not look at Ethan as he passed. That, I thought, was its own kind of answer to every question Ethan had ever had about the nature of what they had built together. Ethan did not move immediately. He stood at the head of the table, with his hands at his sides and his face doing something complicated and private that I did not think he was aware anyone could see. The tears had stopped. What was left in their place was something rawer and less defined. Not grief exactly, not shame exactly, but the specific expression of a man standing inside the consequences of his own choices, and finding that the architecture of them is both exactly what he built, and nothing like what he imagined it would feel like to stand inside. One of the FBI agents stepped toward him. Ethan held up one hand, a small gesture, almost gentle, asking for a single moment. The agent stopped, gave him 3 seconds. Ethan straightened. He buttoned the middle button of his navy jacket. He picked up his phone from the table in front of him, looked at it for one moment, and set it back down. He would not be taking it with him. He understood that. Then he turned and walked toward the door. He had to pass me to get there. The table was long, and the room was wide enough that he could have angled his path to give us several feet of distance, and I would have understood if he had. Instead, he walked the direct line, and when he drew level with where I was standing, he stopped. I turned to face him. He was 34 years old. He was wearing a suit he had chosen specifically for today. His eyes were dry now, but red at the rims, and there was something in them that I recognized from a very long time ago, from a specific afternoon when he was 11 years old and had broken something valuable and come to tell me about it before I found out on my own. Because even then, even at 11, he had understood that the telling was better than the finding out. He opened his mouth. "Dad," his voice came out wrecked and low, and he stopped, and I could see him trying to find the sentence that would fit inside the space between us and not finding it because there was no sentence. There was not a combination of words in any language that was adequate to this specific distance between this specific father and this specific son, in this specific room, on this specific afternoon. His throat worked. "I know," I said, and I meant all of it, all of the things he could not say, and I could not say, and that existed between us, anyway permanent and unresolvable, and entirely, completely real. I meant the gap-toothed 8-year-old in the photograph. I meant the Pasadena garage and the first client and the years of bringing him along, teaching him the work, believing that the thing I was building had someone to carry it forward. I meant Wednesday night in the supply closet and Linda's voice saying, "You did exactly what I told you to do from the very beginning." I meant all 34 years of it, the true parts and the false parts, and the parts I would never be able to fully separate from each other. I meant all of it, and I could not say any of it, so I said, "I know," and Ethan Hayes closed his eyes for 1 second. And then he nodded once, and then the FBI agent put a hand on his arm and guided him out through the door. The room was very quiet. 12 shareholders sat around the table, looking at the space where 2 men had just been. Carol was still at the far end, her hands folded her face, doing the thing it did when she was holding something together by will alone. One of the shareholders, the retired aerospace engineer from Pasadena, 71 years old, who had written the first outside check Hayes Innovation had ever received, who had shaken my hand in the garage and said, "I believe in what you're building," pushed back his chair and walked around the table to where I was standing. He put his hand out. I shook it. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He had been in this company for 30 years, and the handshake said everything the words would have cluttered. Then the others began to file out quietly without the usual post-meeting conversation, giving the room back to whatever it needed to be now. When the last shareholder had gone, Carol Simmons stood up. She gathered the papers that were still spread across the table, the printed materials, the slide printouts, the documentation that had just dismantled the best-laid plan that 2 people who were supposed to love me had ever constructed, and she stacked them into a neat pile with the same careful deliberateness she brought to everything. Then she looked at me. "Marcus called while you were presenting," she said. "Linda was taken into custody at the Beverly Hills house at 3 o'clock. She was packing a suitcase." A brief pause. The FBI submitted the MLAT freeze request to Swiss authorities simultaneously with the arrest. The account will be flagged for monitoring within 48 hours. I nodded. Dr. Frost filed for voluntary suspension of his medical license this morning, Carol continued. Before any formal board action, his attorney called Marcus at 8:15. She paused again, and her voice did something small and careful around the next part. "Patrick Donnelly from the Times called the main line 20 minutes ago asking for comment. I told him we would have a statement by end of business." "I'll write it," I said. Carol picked up the stack of papers and held them against her chest and looked at me with the expression she had worn at the beginning of this, the steady, clear-eyed attention of someone who had decided the most useful thing she could do was be present and had been present through all of it. "Richard," she said, "go home." I looked at the window. The Los Angeles skyline was still there, the mountains the grid of Wilshire, the afternoon light going gold and long across the rooftops. All of it exactly as it had been before any of this happened. All of it completely different. I said, "soon." I stayed in the conference room for a while after Carol left. I am not sure how long exactly. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift the particular westward drift of a Southern California sun in October, moving the shadows of the window mullions slowly across the conference table the way a clock moves its hands steady and indifferent, and entirely unconcerned with what had just happened in this room. The city outside the glass continued to do what it always did. Traffic moved on Bunker Hill Avenue. A helicopter crossed the sky from east to west. Somewhere below, ordinary Friday afternoon, Los Angeles was going about the specific business of being itself, and the fact that it was doing so felt just at that moment like the most stabilizing thing I could have observed. I pulled out the chair at the center of the long side of the table, the position I had taken when I walked in, and I sat down in it. The USB drive was still in the laptop port. I pulled it out and held it in my palm. It was small and light, and entirely unremarkable to look at the kind of object you could leave in a jacket pocket and forget about the kind of thing you might find months later, and not immediately remember what was on it. Nothing about it communicated what it contained or what it had done. 35 years of work, a marriage, a son, a company. And now this, a piece of plastic smaller than my thumb, sitting in the palm of my hand in an empty conference room on the 28th floor of a building I had chosen, because it reminded people of what they were part of. I closed my fingers around it. My phone rang. Marcus. "It's done," he said when I picked up. "Ethan and Reynolds are in federal custody. The processing is underway. Their attorneys have been notified." A brief pause. "Linda's arraignment will be scheduled for early next week. Her attorney, one she apparently retained 2 months ago, without telling anyone, has already been in contact with the DA's office." 2 months ago. She had retained an attorney 2 months ago, which meant she had known or suspected that this might end with an arraignment, and had prepared for it the way she had prepared for everything, quietly, methodically, in advance, without telling a soul. "Of course she did," I said. "The Swiss bank has confirmed receipt of the MLAT freeze request," Marcus continued. "The account is flagged. No withdrawals can process without triggering an immediate federal alert. The formal freeze order will take 48 to 72 hours to execute through Swiss regulatory channels, but functionally the money isn't going anywhere." Another pause, and his voice shifted slightly, not softer but more deliberate the way it got, when he was saying something that mattered beyond the legal facts of it. "Richard, you should know I've been doing this for 30 years. What you put together in 36 hours with the evidence you had and the situation you were in, I have not seen that before. Not like that." I looked at the window. The Santa Monica Mountains were going purple in the distance the way they did in the late afternoon, when the light came from a low angle and caught the sage and the dry grass and turned the whole range into something that looked painted. "I had help," I said. "You did?" Marcus agreed. "Use it as an excuse to buy Carol a very good bottle of wine." I almost smiled. Almost. "I'll call you tonight," I said. I ended the call and sat for another moment. Then I pulled a legal pad from the credenza behind me, the same credenza that had held presentation materials for 100 meetings over 11 years, and I uncapped a pen, and I wrote the statement for the Times. It took 11 minutes. I have been speaking on behalf of Hayes Innovation Studio for 35 years, and I know what the company sounds like when it speaks, and I know what it needs to say and what it does not. I wrote 6 sentences. They were accurate and they were measured, and they said everything that needed to be said without saying anything that did not. I tore the sheet off the pad, folded it in half, and set it on the table for Carol to collect. Then I stood up, put on my jacket, and picked up the USB drive one final time before sliding it into my breast pocket. I walked to Carol's office on the way to the elevator. She was already at her desk, her reading glasses on a fresh set of reports spread in front of her. The office looked exactly as it always did. Organized, purposeful, inhabited by someone who understood that the work continued regardless of what had happened in the conference room down the hall. "Carol," I said from the doorway. She looked up. "Co-director," I said. "Effective Monday." She held my gaze for a moment. Something moved across her face, the same something that had moved across it in the coffee shop that morning. That territory between tears and a smile that belongs specifically to people who have been doing quiet, unacknowledged work for a very long time and have just been told that someone noticed. "I'll have the transition documents drafted by end of day," she said. "I know you will," I said. I took the elevator down. In the lobby, the security guard at the front desk, a man named Gerald, who had worked the afternoon shift for 7 years and who knew me by name and always asked about the company's projects with genuine curiosity, looked up when I came through. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," Gerald said. "You heading out early?" I thought about that. 2 days ago, early would have meant before 10 at night. 2 days ago felt like a different geological era. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." "Have a good weekend, sir." "Thank you, Gerald," I said. "You too." I pushed through the revolving door and stepped out onto Bunker Hill Avenue. The evening air was cool and carried the faint mineral smell that downtown Los Angeles gets in October when the Santa Ana winds are building somewhere to the east and the city can feel them coming before they arrive. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my jacket open and let the air move around me. The Volvo was in the parking structure. I could drive to Beverly Hills to the house I had paid for and lived in for 22 years, with its kitchen where I had burned the roof of my mouth on coffee on a Sunday morning, 2 years and 4 months ago, while Linda planned the architecture of my destruction across the table from me. I stood on the sidewalk. Then I walked to the parking structure, got in the car, and drove east. Not toward Beverly Hills, toward Pasadena. The garage smelled exactly the same. That was the first thing I noticed when I pushed the wooden door open, the specific combination of motor oil and sawdust, and something older underneath both of them, something that belonged to the building itself, to the concrete and the timber and the particular quality of air that accumulates in a space where someone has done serious work for a long time. I had not been inside this garage in 4 years, and it smelled exactly the same as it had smelled 35 years ago, when I had set a folding table against the far wall and put my drafting tools on it and told myself that this was where it was going to begin. The drafting table was still there, not the folding table that had been replaced years ago, with a proper one solid oak, wide enough to lay out full-scale design sheets. It was dusty now, the surface filmed over with the particular gray of undisturbed time. But it was there, and on the corner of it, held in place by a small piece of tape that had gone yellow and brittle at the edges, was a photograph. I crossed the garage and looked at it. It was a different photograph than the one on my desk at the office, older, taken before Ethan was born, before the company had a name or a client or anything to show for itself. Just Linda and me, standing in front of this garage on a Saturday afternoon, Linda laughing at something I had said, her hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. I had put it there 33 years ago, because I had wanted to remember what I was working toward. I stood in front of it for a long time. Then I pulled out the chair, the old wooden chair that had been there since the beginning, the one with the slightly uneven leg that I had always meant to fix and never had, and I sat down. I put both hands flat on the dusty surface of the drafting table. The oak was cold under my palms. I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside. They were light and slow, the footsteps of someone who knew exactly where they were going and was not in a hurry to get there. The door, which I had left half open, swung wider. Margaret Hayes was 85 years old and had been moving through the world with the unhurried certainty of someone who had long since made peace with how much time she had and how she intended to use it. She was wearing a cardigan that I recognized from 20 years ago. She walked to the chair across from mine, the second chair, the one where my first business partner had sat for 10 years, and she lowered herself into it with the careful deliberateness of age, and she looked at me across the dusty drafting table. "I saw the car," she said. Her voice was smaller than it used to be, but it had lost none of its directness. "I knew you'd come here before anywhere else." "You were right," I said. She studied my face in the way she had always studied it, the way a person looks at something they made and know the original design of all the way down to the load-bearing elements. Her eyes were the same color they had always been, pale gray, almost silver, with the specific quality of attention that had always made me feel, even as an adult, that she was seeing something I had not yet noticed about myself. "Tell me," she said. So I told her. Not all of it, not the legal details, or the financial chain, or the timestamps on the server logs. Just the shape of it, just what it felt like to stand in that supply closet and understand in the space of 6 minutes and 41 seconds that the life you believed you were living had a different architecture than the one you thought you knew. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, not the absence of words, but the presence of someone thinking carefully about which words were the right ones. "Richard," she said, "I tried to tell you about Linda 15 years ago. Do you remember?" I closed my eyes. "Yes. You told me it was between you and her and asked me not to interfere." She paused. You were right to say that. It was between you and her. Another pause, and her voice softened in a way that made something in my chest hurt in a clean and specific way, the way things hurt when they are true. But I want you to hear me say this because I think you need to hear it from someone who has known you for 62 years. She leaned forward slightly in the old chair and put her hand over mine on the drafting table. Her hand was small and warm, and the skin of it had the papery softness of the great age. You loved too much. That is what happened. You loved Linda too much to see what she was doing, and you loved Ethan too much to imagine what he was capable of. And you loved this company too much to believe that the people inside it could use that love against you. She pressed my hand gently. That is not stupidity, Richard. That is not weakness. That is the thing that built everything in this room and in that building and in every product you ever put into the world. You only loved too much, and I will not let you sit here and call that a failure. My throat closed entirely. I did not trust my voice with any of the things that were happening in my chest, so I did not try to use it. I turned my hand over under hers and held on the way I had held on to this same hand when I was 6 years old and frightened of something I could not name. And she had sat beside me then, the same way she was sitting beside me now, steady and present and entirely unafraid of whatever it was we were sitting inside together. We stayed like that for a long time. Outside, the Pasadena evening was doing what Pasadena evenings do in October, cooling quickly, the air going still and clear, the smell of eucalyptus drifting down from the foothills. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog was barking at something with the persistent optimism of a dog that believes the thing it is barking at will eventually respond. My mother's hand was warm over mine. The drafting table was cold beneath us both. And for the first time in 48 hours, I breathed. Some nights I still sit at that old drafting table in Pasadena and ask myself how I missed it for so long. The answer is simple. I was too busy building to look up. This family story taught me something painful. The people closest to you are not automatically the safest. Love is not proof of loyalty. I trusted without verifying, gave without conditions, and called it devotion, when sometimes it was just blindness with a better name. My honest opinion, every person has the right to protect what they built. Not out of suspicion, but with open, clear eyes. If this family betrayal teaches you one thing, don't do what I did. Don't wait for the crisis. Ask the hard questions now, while there is still time to hear honest answers. God placed my mother beside me that evening in the garage. She told me the truth I was finally ready to hear. That was a grace I didn't deserve, but received anyway. This family story nearly took everything. What it could not take was what I started with: 2 hands, 1 table, and the will to begin again. Every family betrayal has survivors. I choose to be one. I hope you do too. If this family story moved you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Every word you share means more than you know. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. Heads up, some upcoming stories contain fictional elements created purely for reflection and education. If that's not for you, we respect that completely. Feel free to find content that serves you better.